Hey kids, had a bad day? Well, could be worse. You could be living in a world without modern anesthetic. Today, we'll be talking about some surgical procedures carried out long before the development of medicine as we know it today. Now, once you go back a certain distance, the line between operation and mutilation is pretty thin. So, for our purposes, surgery refers to any bodily manipulation carried out with the intent of fixing some injury or illness. And away we go. The very first surgery that we have historical evidence for dates as far back as 6500 BC. It's called trepanning, which is a nice word for carving someone's frickin' skull open using nothing but a rock. Maybe a rock on a stick if you were lucky. In all seriousness though, you can see that a good deal of care went into the procedure, which lets us know that this isn't just the result of random injury. Many skulls even showed signs of healing around the holes, meaning plenty of the people who underwent this whole thing just got up and went about their day afterwards. Alright, hold on, you say. This all sounds guano insane. No way this was that common of an occurrence. Well friend, if you've been watching this channel long enough, you should know that if you give human beings the benefit of the doubt, chances are they'll prove you wrong. In fact, so far, over 1,500 trepanned skulls have been dug up all across the globe, from Europe to China and even the Americas. This means that between 5 and 10% of all skulls that we've found from the Neolithic period have had at least one man-made hole scraped into them. To put it this way, based on that data, there's a greater probability of someone born in the late Stone Age having their brain matter exposed by some shaman with a chunk of flint than someone born in the USA being a redhead. To this day, nobody really knows why this was such a common practice, but most theories tend to revolve around the idea of releasing some kind of dark supernatural force from the patient. Man, I'm getting real sick of all these evil entities infecting our minds and bodies. Huh, you can say that again. I tell you, I need these demons like I need a hole in the head. No, wait. Fast forward to 600 BC. Over in India, there lived a guy called Maharshi Susruta. Now, this guy was a medical mastermind. He wrote a treatise known as Susruta Samhita, which described countless different conditions, treatments, and yes, even surgeries. One of which is the first recorded instance of rhinoplasty. That means nose job. A hornbill's a type of bird. I'm here too. Anyway, here's how it's done according to Susruta. First, you get them plastered, obviously. Second, you use a leaf to measure out the part of the nose you want fixed. Then, you use the leaf to cut off a flap of skin from the cheek or forehead of the patient. This part's important though. You gotta remember to leave a little piece of it still attached. Otherwise, you just got a chunk of dirty dead face meat on your hands. Now, wherever you're looking to stick the new flesh on, you rub that part raw with a knife. Also, you're gonna want to stick 2 plant stalks in their nostrils so their nose keeps its proper shape. Slap the skin on, suture it, dust it with licorice powder for some reason, and cover it with cotton. Sesame oil should be regularly applied until the skin is fully healed. If you're like me, I already do that by default, so it shouldn't be an issue. Finally, at long last, your sniffer is reborn. Don't worry, you still look like a freak. Just slightly less so. Moving on, our next surgery took place in 10th century Spain on Sancho I of Leon, otherwise known as Sancho the Fat. Now, normally, back in the day, having some meat on your bones was a sign of wealth and power and all that, but this guy was like TLC documentary tier, to the point where he could hardly function as a human being. So his constituents said, "Greetings, your thickness. Yeah, you can't be king anymore on account of you keep breaking every horse we give you, and nobody wants to wash between your accordion-like neck folds no more." After his adipose got him deposed, Sancho decided to seek medical help for his condition, under the oversight of well-reputed physician Hasdai ibn Shaprut, which is an anagram for paintbrush aids. Now, if there's one thing that medieval man understood, it's practicality. Lap band, gastric bypass, belly balloon, these all exist to help people who don't have the self-control to stop eating so much on their own. But Dr. Shaprut didn't believe in beating around the bush. He said, well, why don't we just stop the patient from shoving food into his own greasy maw in the first place? And decided to just up and stitch the dude's lips together. After the operation, the only nutrients that Sancho received came through a straw, in the form of a mixture known as thoriaca, which was a complex blend of several herbs, fruits, and seeds, including opium. It was basically the closest thing you could find to lean at the time, and lean he became, losing around half his weight before ascending to the throne once more. So this is the part of the video where I pander to the desires of the audience. If there's one thing I know you internet people can't get enough of, it's things going inside people's eyeballs. Let's talk about cataract surgery. The art of dealing with people's clouded lenses has been around for millennia, believe it or not. That Susruta guy from earlier actually talked about the most common procedure for cataracts for most of civilized history, which is known as the couching method. Couching is done by taking a sharp object like a needle or a thorn and ever so gently stabbing their eye hole at weird angles until the lens moves out of the way. No lasers, no sedatives, no paralytics, just a rusty old pin and some elbow grease, the way God intended. The majority of the time, this operation didn't work, usually just damaging the already blind eye irreparably. Shocker, right? And even if it did go as planned, you still, didn't have a lens in your eye, so you essentially went from, I can't tell if I'm dead or not, to, ah yes, it is quite yellow out today. By God. Something moved somewhere. A slightly more refined version of this operation is the suction method, which dates back to at least the 10th century AD, if not older. This procedure is described as requiring, quote, a large incision in the eye, a hollow needle, and an assistant with an extraordinary lung capacity. Though this reads like the setup to the world's most horrifying party trick, it's actually the bare minimum number of tools needed to completely extract the lens from the eye. In case you didn't pick up on how, here's a diagram. This method generally saw a greater success rate and fewer complications than its non-extracting counterpart, so hopefully you can sleep well tonight knowing that the number of human beings who have sucked a piece of somebody's living eyeball through a straw is above zero. Anywho, let's all just be thankful that we live in an era where procedures like these are a thing of the past. Now remember kids, even though the surgeries I described here do sound pretty easy to pull off, please don't try them at home. But if you do, please put it on LiveLeak afterwards. But anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and watch you for thanking. Wait, shit, I meant...
Hey kids, I was inspired to make this video while doing research on the ancient medicine man, Galen. Apparently, he would often do experiments on animals in order to learn more about the body, his favorite of which was the Barbary ape, due to its anatomical similarity to humans. Now when I say experiments, I don't mean push a button, get a peanut type things. I'm talking like Josef Mengele meets the plague dogs. He'd clamp their pee tubes shut just to watch their kidneys swell, cut their spinal cords in different places to see what went limp and what didn't, and squeeze their brains and make them go unconscious, to name a few. My initial reaction was, hey, that's neat, but then after some thought I was like, whoa, hold the phone. In 200 AD you couldn't get a doorknob even, yet if you had the right resources you could order a goddamn monkey. Many monkeys in fact. By the barrelful presumably. Alternatively, if you were born in the right place, you could be the monkey poacher, making a living wrestling up some primates with nothing more than a net, a pokey thing, a hole in the ground, and a whole lot of ambition. So I got to thinking, what other kind of animals did ancient Rome have access to? Apparently basically everything that lived in this part of the map. They were particularly fond of elephants, and it's easy to see why. Sure, elephants aren't that big of a deal to the average person today, right? You've been seeing pictures of them since you were 2, big whoop. But imagine if you were a 20-year-old man who had never seen an elephant in your life. The closest thing you've ever witnessed is like horses, maybe some deer now and then. You get drafted, you go out to battle, you're a little scared but you've been trained well, you're ready. Then, over the horizon, you see 20 house-sized behemoths with giant tentacles sticking out of their faces, horns longer than your body sticking out of their mouths, all screaming their weird trumpety scream, making your whole body vibrate like Mars himself is shitting on your very existence. So naturally, Rome loved to show these things off all the time, just as a display of power. Like, imagine if you were going to a speech in DC, and Trump rolls up with a pack of dragons. You'd listen to every word he said. He's got fucking dragons. That's what it was like seeing the emperor parade around with elephants back in the day. Of course, that wasn't the only use they had for imported animals. When they weren't being shown off in menageries, many of the exotic beasts brought to Rome were used in shows called venatios, which were basically like modern day bullfights, only instead of bulls, you had whatever crazy critters the state could find. Lions, crocodiles, gazelles, whatever. Around 55 BC, Roman statesman Pompey the Great decided to organize one such event, the feature creature of which was, you guessed it, an elephant. Unfortunately, Pompey forgot a crucial Barnum and Bailey trade secret. See, you're supposed to break the elephant's spirit before the show, not during. So the boys get to poking and the thing starts freaking out, just screaming and crying, even gesturing towards the audience like it was begging for mercy. Now the crowd at this kind of event was mainly composed of dirty, bloodthirsty peasants, and even they were like, holy shit, this is messed up. I came here for a nice family-friendly disemboweling or two, but this, just deplorable. Then they all start crying and the whole thing just ends up being being a huge mess. Anyway, these types of spectacles became larger and larger as time went on. It's said that Emperor Trajan once held a venatio lasting 120 days, during which some 11,000 animals were killed. They also got pretty elaborate. A lot of creativity went into keeping things fresh for the crowd. In 203 AD, they had a model of a crashed ship built inside the arena, and an assortment of 400 animals were set loose from the wreckage and then killed. That's what we should do for the next Super Bowl halftime show, honestly. Just pack every team's mascot into a decommissioned submarine. Then, when they all run out, we have the troops gun them down while the national anthem plays in the background. Anyway, the ingenuity of the people organizing these events really knew no bounds. One time they tied together a bear and a bull just to see what they'd do. Unfortunately, all that happened was the stock market crashed. Also, fun fact, one Emperor Commodus is credited with the invention of a unique crescent-shaped arrow designed specifically to decapitate ostriches and watch them run around headless for a while. Seriously, they did that so often that they needed a device to make the job easier. Sometimes, just to shake things up, they'd have the animals kill the people, which was known as damnatio ad bestias. This form of execution was typically carried out using lions, but other beasts were used as well, including dogs, bears, and at one point even an eagle, although the guy was crucified first, so it wasn't much of a fight. So, moral of the story, if you ever end up in ancient Rome and you want to see some animals, you'll still have access to almost all the same creatures we see in zoos today, and the only catch is that something has to die at the end. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, you know what's cool? Etymology. Etymology. There we go. Today we're going to talk about some words, some combinations thereof, and where they come from. First is the phrase white elephant. Now for those out of the loop, a white elephant is a possession which its owner cannot dispose of and whose cost, particularly that of maintenance, is out of proportion to its usefulness. And also a game played during the holidays for people who prefer random garbage over actual personalized presents. According to legend, this saying dates back to the monarchs of Siam. Whenever one of the king's courtiers drew his displeasure through whatever means, he would offer them a gift of a white elephant. It was considered the ultimate insult to refuse a gift from the king, so naturally the elephantee would be forced to accept. Now if you know elephants as well as I do, you would know that they are frickin' gigantic. They can consume around 50 gallons of water and 500 pounds of foliage every day, which would be quite expensive to keep up in modern times, let alone hundreds of years ago. Plus these ones are albino, so you have to hose them down with SPF 30 once an hour or else they'll turn into one big tumor. Okay, not really, but they definitely needed their shade. Also, Southeast Asian cultures considered white elephants sacred, so you weren't allowed to make the animal work, and you'd have to hire a load of people to care for it on a daily basis. Basically, the person getting the gift would have to choose between financial ruin or letting it die and being socially ostracized and possibly even killed. I thought this whole thing was pretty clever, so I've started doing my own version. Whenever someone gets on my nerves, I spray paint progressive comments all over their house. That way, they'll have to spend the whole day angrily scrubbing it off, and then the neighbors will be like, "Wait, does that mean he likes the N-word? Bigoted scum." Next is balls to the wall. This one harkens back to the days when planes flew in the air. The throttle of many aircrafts would be controlled with either a lever or a plunger, either of which were often topped with a sphere for easy handling. Thus, when you wanted to throw the plane into max thrust, you'd put the balls to the wall. In a similar vein, the phrase balls deep comes from pinball machines. When you want to launch the ball full force, you pull the plunger all the way back, otherwise known as going balls deep. Nah, just kidding. That one actually means what you think it does. Next is getting your goat, a phrase used when someone or something annoys you. The origin of this phrase is still disputed by etymologists, but one theory traces back to the sport of horse racing. In order to stop horses from getting nervous before a race, their owners would stick a goat in the stables to keep them calm. Apparently the presence of a goat has some kind of therapeutic effect on horses, kinda like a therapy dog, except they can't pet it on account of hooves, so they just sniff it for a while, I guess. Cut to a pack of young hooligans looking for something to do besides bootlegging and getting polio. They decide to break into the stables at night and escort the goat to an undisclosed location. Then when the race starts, instead of running straight ahead like a normal person, the horse would run into the crowd and drop kick a grandma or whatever, and the old crotchety oil tycoon who owns the horse would stand up, shaking his cane, yelling, "Those punks really get my goat."
Thanks to modern medicine, anxious horses today can instead be given horsey Xanax to calm them down, which unfortunately means that the days of hot-blooded goat getting are over. However, some would argue that stealing horse tranquilizers can be equally rewarding in its own way, but enough of that mumbo-jumbo. Hey, speaking of which, you ever wonder where mumbo-jumbo comes from? Nice segue, Sam. Thanks, Sam. Anyway, strap in kids, this one's gonna be good. Mumbo Jumbo originates from the Mandingo people of West Africa. The Mandingos were a polygamous culture, and whenever a domestic quarrel broke out, they would soon hear animalistic screaming coming from the woods. They look over, and out runs this guy, known as Mumbo Jumbo. Now Mumbo Jumbo's arrival was considered a big deal to the Mandingo. The whole tribe would sing and dance in the town center until midnight, at which point Mr. Jumbo would settle the dispute. And by settle the dispute, I mean tie the female to a post and slap her upside the head with a stick for an hour, while the rest of the village watched, all hootin' and a-hollerin'. And then he'd run screaming back into the woods, where he would remain until the next complaint arose. What the Mandingo women didn't know is that Mumbo Jumbo is not, in fact, a wild patriarchal deity from the forest, but merely the offending woman's husband or one of his friends wearing a costume made from tree bark and leaves. Anyway, the guy would be babbling nonsense the whole time, which is where the phrase Mumbo Jumbo is derived from. So next time one of your superiors uses the words Mumbo Jumbo in a jocular fashion, remember to report them to HR for promoting African wife beating. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, time for another hot steamy load of knowledge dripping down your neck and chest. Today, we're gonna talk about the greatest mind to ever live. Nope, not him. Nope. Keep trying. Who I'm really referring to is the ancient Greek philosopher known as Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes followed the school of thought known as cynicism. Far from the yelling at CNN, sitting down during the pledge kind of cynicism we know today, cynic philosophy centers around the rejection of conventional desires in favor of a simple, moderate lifestyle. But while many philosophers made a virtue out of self-discipline, Diogenes took all that to a whole new level. He was the most down-to-earth guy out there. Literally, he lived on the ground, in a big tub in the marketplace where he'd beg for a living. For a while, his only possession was a wooden bowl, until one day he saw a child drinking out of his hands, and he was like, what do I need this shit for? Now, though his way of life and perspective was unique enough, it's the way Diogenes showed it that really set him apart from the rest. When someone today wants to go against society, they dye their hair blue and make a blog post about how there aren't any obese women of color in Super Smash Bros. On the other hand, when Diogenes has something to say, he just jerks off in public. Takes a dump in the amphitheater, pisses on passerby, whatever. The way he saw it, he was just performing much needed bodily functions while also protesting the superficiality of the civilization around him. Keep in mind, though he was an unwashed, publicly defecating homeless man, that's not all he was. His wit was easily on par with his philosophical contemporaries, and his lack of inhibition meant that everyone knew it. For example, here's an often pondered question of the day. How do you define a human in the simplest of terms possible? Plato decided to tackle this question, and he came up with featherless biped. And in the ancient Greek world, they didn't have any kangaroos or gibbons or nothing, so people were the only things around that both walked on two legs and didn't have feathers. Plato thought he was real clever with that one. Diogenes, on the other hand, he wasn't having any of it, so he said, alright you pompous prick, I'll give you a featherless biped. So, in reality, we do not learn, and what we call learning is only a process of recollection. Oh goddammit, not you again. What's up, fuckers? Hey, check out this person I found. Isn't it such a human? Look at him, wow. What a guy. Anyway, love to stay and chat, but I saw some trash outside that looked delicious. Smell you later, deliberator. Yes, my student? Yeah, what the fuck? Here's another anecdote. Macedonian King Alexander was a big fan of Diogenes, so he decided to pay him a visit. And he said, hey man, big fan. If there's any favor I can do for you, anything at all, just let me know, I'll make it happen. Now to put this into perspective, this is Alexander we're talking about. The guy who had his cousin straight up assassinated so he could take the throne. The guy who would later go on to conquer the majority of the civilized world. And you know what Diogenes says? He goes, yeah, you can do me a favor. Move over, you're in my light.
Wow, I'm not even mad. You really are just a legend. Diogenes lived up to the ripe old age of 89. I don't know if that's a testament to his lifestyle or if he just got lucky, but either way, if there is a god, he definitely has a sense of humor. The exact cause of Diogenes' death varies depending on which source you look at. Some say he died from an infected dog bite. Others say it was from eating raw octopus. My favorite theory is that one day he just got tired of living, and he just held his breath till he died. He left behind instructions on what to do with his body after he passed. Now, when people think of special post-mortem instructions like these, they usually think, scatter my ashes at 6:53 a.m. off the western face of Mount Rainier using my grandfather's favorite ladle. None of that with Diogenes. He kept it simple. In the words of Danny DeVito,
when I'm dead, just throw me in the trash.
Specifically, he wanted his body tossed into the wild so animals could feast on him, thereby giving back to the earth what little he took from it. So kids, moral of the story, don't judge a book by its cover. The man who appears to be nothing more than a shit-smeared babbling vagrant could actually be the wisest man you'll ever meet. Or he could really just be a raving fucking lunatic. Bring a knife, just in case. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, let's talk about Fidel Castro. We're all familiar with Castro, right? Dictator of Cuba for the whole second half of the 20th century, main antagonist of the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know. Anyway, this man loves three things. He loves Cuba, he loves communism, and good God, does the man love dairy. Yep, you heard me right. The all-powerful dictator of communist Cuba is obsessed with anything related to milk and its derivatives. I drew up a little chart here, right? I call it the Leche Lovin' Ladder. At the bottom you got dairy farmers, then you got Ross O'Donovan, then Mr. Bones, then starving babies, and then all the way up at the top here, you got Fidel Castro. Today, I'm going to share a few true stories that illustrate his preoccupation. Okay, the first one isn't really a story so much as a fact, but according to several sources, Castro was known to be able to eat 18 scoops of ice cream after a meal. That's more than 2 pints. If that doesn't impress you, then go try it for yourself. Me, I can barely manage a pint and a half on an empty stomach, and Castro's doing it on top of a full meal. But it gets better. Being such an ice cream connoisseur, Castro ordered the construction of an ice cream shop. But this isn't your average everyday parlor, not by a long shot. He built a straight up ice cream complex taking up an entire city block. This was a piece of modern architecture too, in total contrast to the surrounding slums, all for the sake of ice cream. The place is called Coppelia, and it's still open today. Of course, Castro's obsession went beyond just personal pleasure. Dairy was so dear to him that it often found its way into diplomatic interactions. Like one time, a French diplomat came to visit, so Castro whips out some Cuban cheese. Specifically though, it was Camembert cheese, a variety that France is famous for. French guy was like, hey, not bad, it's almost as good as the French kind. Try it again, I think you'll find it's even better than the French. Alright, I wouldn't say that. I'm sorry, are you disrespecting my cheese? In my house? On my island? No, I mean it's good, I just said the French kind is better. Maybe if you froggy fucks bathed once in a while, you'd be able to taste the cheese instead of your own B.O. Listen, you've got your cigars, we've got our cheese, live with it. Fine. Fuck him, it's good cheese. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but that's basically how it went down. So already it's obvious that dairy is of great value to Castro. Most exceptional, however, is how this value reflected in his leadership. Naturally, having an entire nation at his disposal, Castro wanted to bolster the Cuban dairy industry as much as possible. But there was one problem. Cuba initially had two types of cows called La Reinas and Zebus. La Reinas came from the days when Spain ruled Cuba, and Zebus originated from India. Both of these cows are well suited to the Cuban environment, having a very high tolerance for heat. However, they don't produce much milk, they're mostly just raised for their meat. So Castro decides to import thousands of Holsteins from Canada. Holsteins are the classic black and white cows, and as we all know, you can juice these guys for days. They are utterly superior. Only problem is, they're used to living in Canada, so when they're plopped down under the scorching Caribbean sun, it's going to stress them out. They're not going to be laughing cows by any means. So as a result, Castro's imports still didn't put out enough milk to satisfy his desires.
At this point, your average run-of-the-mill dairy queen would have given up. But Castro, he's more than that. He's a dairy dictator. So he ordered the construction of a giant air-conditioned complex with the sole purpose of providing a comfortable environment for his Holsteins. And it helped a little bit, but they were still stressed out. They still weren't putting out at their natural levels. And as you can imagine, climate controlling an entire facility is very expensive, so Castro was forced to abandon the project. But like the astronaut he is, Castro held on to his dream of finding the Milky Way. So he gathered a team of scientists and farmers and ordered them to breed together the Zebus and the Holsteins in order to produce a heat-resistant, lactose-pumping super cow. The breeding efforts were mostly a bust, never producing the bovine master race that Castro longed for. However, there was one exception. Under Castro's program, a single individual was born that met his expectations with flying colors. The cow was named Ubre Blanca, Spanish for white udder, and she produced world record-breaking volumes of milk, peaking at 110 liters a day. That's more than 29 entire gallons of lactation. Needless to say, Castro was absolutely euphoric at this isolated success of his. To say he went ballistic would be an understatement. He went intercontinentally ballistic. Like, India hasn't got shit on the levels of cow worship that Castro performed. Daily updates were published in the Cuban national newspaper describing Ubre Blanca's health and productivity, and when she died in 1985, Castro commissioned a giant marble statue of the cow in her honor. He also had scientists harvest tissue and egg samples for the sake of preserving her DNA. After Ubre Blanca's death, Castro's plans for the Cuban dairy industry got even more desperate and ridiculous somehow. This is based off of an actual conversation that he had with his team of scientists in 1987. Okay guys, hear me out. What if we make cows that are the size of dogs, so that way they can live in people's apartments with them? Fidel, I don't think that's gonna work. No, it'll work. You just have to grow grass in the apartment too. You can't be serious. Yeah, you just gotta put up some fluorescent lights. Bam, little grazing patch for your doggy cow. You are a fucking lunatic. And obviously nothing ever came of that idea, and Cuba's dairy industry is still floundering today, sadly. So yeah, if you haven't gotten the picture by now, the dude likes milk. Imagine he's at the birth of his grandson, right? Ah, what a beautiful baby boy. Fidel, there's something we need to tell you. Your grandson, he's lactose intolerant. Prepare the firing squad. Anyway, there's plenty of other miscellaneous stories surrounding his little preoccupation, like the time the CIA tried to poison his milkshake, so I just decided to highlight a few big ones. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, from clubbing seals to inventing new compound nouns for snow, nobody knows how to kick it quite like the Inuit. Of course, if you're a close-minded tree dweller like me, you might initially think that they can't be that good at storytelling, given that they only know about like 6 things. But that's not true. They've actually got an incredibly complex and fascinating oral tradition. You could ask one about it, there's plenty of these guys around today, but they've got Jesus and microwaves and shit, and that's boring. We want to talk about the stuff from before missionaries came and sent their miserable way of life to a farm upstate. So instead, let a 20-year-old college kid who's never lived outside of Delaware tell you all about it. Obvious disclaimer, Inuits are super diverse. Calling a caribou Inuit a copper Inuit is like calling a copper caribou a caribou caribou. Sure, they both look the same from far away, but when a thunderstorm hits, you better know which one to hide under. As such, while most of the following can be applied in broad terms to most Inuits, the little details come from a variety of subcultures that don't necessarily represent the whole. Got it? Swank. Now, a lot of the world's faiths are centered around bringing people together and inspiring them with stories and images of the divine, so as to give them a wider sense of purpose here on Earth. That's all well and good, but that whole search for greater meaning thing only really comes into play once your original purpose of making sure you don't die is pretty much figured out. Not so for the Inuit. You see, it ain't so easy living in a place where plants can't grow and being naked for an hour means certain death. As such, their beliefs were a little more practical, being more so geared towards fostering the paranoid levels of fear required to survive in such a hostile environment. For example, the Inuit believed that everyone has a sort of life force or soul, what they called anirnik, and like plenty of religions, they believed it lived on after death and could meddle in the world of mortals. But while most cultures regard animals as being spiritually inferior meat puppets, to the Inuits, a creature's soul is just as powerful and vengeful as that of a person. And like I said, up there in the Arctic, not much greenery in the scenery, so they basically had no choice but to devour nothing but souls every single day. And wouldn't you know it, souls don't much care for getting ate. So the Inuit made sure to follow a complex set of guidelines on how to placate their prey in the afterlife, lest the pissed off ghost of that Arctic tern whispers sweet nothings into a polar bear's ears and turns your whole village into a big Japanese flag by sunrise. Here's a few. If you kill something, make sure you eat it all. Just as an American who doesn't clean his plate doesn't get dessert, an Inuit who doesn't eat all his walrus doesn't get any more walrus. Ever. Till they starve. If you kill a polar bear, make sure to point its head towards the direction it came from so it can find its way home more easily. If you pull a seal out of the water, give him some fresh water so he's not thirsty when you bash his brain in. Also, its spirit lives in its bladder, so make sure to hold on to it until the yearly bladder festival, where everyone gets together, blows up their bladders like balloons, and throws them out to sea so they can reincarnate into new seals. These taboos aren't all just about hunting though. For some reason there's a load of them about pregnancy. Don't make fun of people's facial features or else the baby will have the same features. Don't walk backwards or else the baby will come out backwards, dangerous. Face your bed towards a doorway or it'll come out sideways, also dangerous. Don't wrap rope around your hand or it'll come out with the umbilical cord around its neck, extremely dangerous. Don't drink directly from a soup bowl or it'll come out with dark skin, not touching that one. Don't put a bowl on your head or else it'll be wearing the placenta like a hat, too hilarious, and the list goes on. Central to the consequences of breaking a lot of these rules is the being known as Sedna. The story behind Sedna varies pretty wildly between different groups of Inuits, but here's the gist of it. She was once a young girl who pissed everyone off, either by being annoying or eating too much food or rejecting an arranged marriage or marrying a dog for some reason. So her father throws her out of a kayak, and when she tries to get back in, he chops off all her fingers. The sea goddess sees this, furrows her long floppy seaweed brow, does a sassy snap, and the girl turns into an immortal sea witch, while her disembodied fingers turn into the first seals. And to this day, Sedna sits at the bottom of the ocean, growing new fingers which promptly fall off and turn into all the world's seal lions and narwhalruses. That is until someone goofs up in some small arbitrary fashion like, "Yo Sedna, bad news, I just caught a guy chewing a piece of blubber." What's wrong with that? Well, he wasn't looking north while he did it. Are you fucking kidding me? In his defense, he was standing right on the pole, so he literally couldn't look anywhere but south. He could have moved! That's it! No more fingy foods for 3 moons! Another fun creation myth is how the moon and sun came to be. So long ago, there were these two siblings named Melina and Iningin. The two got along just fine as kids, but as the two got older, they were put into their respective genders' living areas and saw each other less and less. Then one day, Iningin got the feeling that his lower nose was in dire need of some Eskimo kisses. So that night, he snuck into the women's lodge, saw his sister, thought, I pick that one, and proceeded to do, unspeakable things, technically becoming his own Eskimo brother. But it was too dark at the time for Melina to tell what happened. The next night, Ningin's like,
I'll fucking do it again.
Only this time, Melina smears soot all over his face. So later she goes over to the men's lodges, and who has crap all over his face but her brother? This makes her so mad that she cuts off her own breasts with a knife, puts them in a bowl, throws them at Ningin, and says, "If you enjoy me so much, then here, eat 'em. Go ahead, eat my disembodied quivering titties." She runs off into the night with a torch, and Iningin is really remorseful or horny or something, so he chases after her with his own torch, and they end up running so fast that they took off like a plane into the sky, and Melina became the sun while Iningin became the moon. Excuse me, Mrs. Elder, if the sun and moon didn't exist yet, how did he do that stuff at night when there was no night? Now, some details of the story are tied into real-world phenomena. Some say that Iningin tripped and messed up his torch, which is why the moon is so dim. And the moon cycles are because he gets really skinny from chasing after her for so long. And the new moon is when he goes away for a few days to hunt seals so he can fatten back up. But here's the kicker. Nobody ever explains what the whole lopping off her tits part was supposed to represent. That's entirely just creative liberty. Just like, yes, that's why the sun doesn't have tits. Probably for the best it doesn't, otherwise half the population will be blind by now, and worse, it's the half that makes up 85% of my viewer base. So you know what? Thanks for slicing and dicing them tea towels, Melina. I kinda owe you my career. But anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and Hey kids, remember the plague, malaria, smallpox? Kinda bad, right? Well, guess what? They're peanuts compared to the level of destruction that's been wreaked over the years across the kingdom next door. Today, I'm gonna talk about some of the most interesting diseases to ever strike the world of plants. The most famous one is probably the potato blight. It's a fungus that attacks potatoes. This is what it looks like. On the left, we have a healthy potato, while on the right, we have a blighty one. Notice how this one is noble and robust, like a lion's heart, while the other is shriveled and black, like Betsy DeVos's uterus. You could try to eat it, but it's basically like rotting cork. You wouldn't get very far. So in 1845, Ireland relied a lot on potatoes, right? That's because their soil was dumb and that's the most nutritious thing they could grow. Then the blight came and all their food turned to poo. 1 million starved, 2 million left. They came to America. They brought freckles and these things. Hoity-toity-toy, now we have the Celtics. Next is the chestnut blight, which infects, you guessed it, the elderly. Wait, no, that's shingles. Chestnut blight infects American chestnut trees, which once populated a huge portion of the South and Mid-Atlantic regions of the country. Key word: once. During the early 20th century, the blight arrived, which ended up killing around 4 billion trees over the course of a couple decades. Hey, remember that time 4 billion giant things died inexplicably? Me neither. Nobody does. Let me give some perspective on the situation. Those trees were huge, like 40 meters tall apiece. That means 160 million kilometers of tree was destroyed by this disease. That's long enough to get from the earth to the sun with 10 million kilometers to spare. Here's another. If we take the volume of all these trees, we get 126 billion cubic meters. If we burn that much wood, we get 861 quadrillion joules of energy. That's the amount released by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, times 10,000. So yeah, kind of a big deal. But who cares, right? Why worry about 4 billion dumb smelly old trees when there's 1,000 whole pandas that need our help? Isn't that right, WWF? You populist scum. Anyway, moving on. This next one is called, get ready, broom rape. I'm serious. Broom rape. Broom rape. Wikipedia, broom rape. Naked broom rape. Imagine if we gave human illnesses names like that. I'm sorry, Sam, but you have urethra cactus. I would just end it right there. Doesn't even matter what the actual symptoms are. Anyway, broom rape is considered a parasitic plant. This is what it does. The seeds of the broom rape will hang out in the soil for years until the roots of a host plant come along. When they do, the broom rape bursts out of its shell and immediately starts leeching off the other organism. Eventually, once they grow enough, they'll breach the surface with these little flowers. Notice, no leaves, no green. Who needs chlorophyll when you're a filthy freeloader, right? These flowers get fertilized and the whole thing starts over. Just one of these guys isn't a big deal to the host. But once you get enough, they have the potential to suck an entire farm dry, causing sweeping crop failure. Pun definitely intended. Next is this one. There's a few different ways you can pronounce it depending on your social standing, ranging from ergot to elgo. Being the disheveled pauper I am, I prefer ergot. Rolls off the tongue, you know. Ergot is a fungus that mainly infects grains like wheat, barley, and especially rye. And it's capable of producing a whole soup of compounds called alkaloids, which can have a variety of effects on the human body. Most of them not fun, mostly spasms and diarrhea, that kind of thing. However, one particular alkaloid called ergotamine structurally resembles LSD and has a similar function when it enters the body. So a medieval peasant would be sitting there, eating a nice loaf of rye bread, just minding his own business. Then all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm blasting out of both ends! My heart's a seizing, my lungs a wheezing, the fucking walls are melting, I can hear Satan's voice, he's telling me to invest in Apple. What does that mean? Why does he want me to buy apples? This would go on for like a day. Sometimes their fingers and toes would fall off, but then they'd be alright. Unless they weren't. Moral of the story, kids, don't eat strange bread. You could trip balls and die. One more thing before we end today's video, I've decided to launch a second channel for all the dumb stuff I think of that doesn't fit the Academy format. It's called Salmonella Vlog. Go check it out. It's in the description. I wrote a slam poem. It's there. Go look. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, if you've been on Earth for any amount of time, you should know that this place is pretty wet and wild. With water just falling from the sky whenever it feels like it, it's no surprise that floods are among nature's most common means of wrecking humanity's hard work. However, not every flood has been made out of plain old H2O. Today, we're going to talk about some of the few non-water liquid disasters that mankind has endured. January 15th, 1919 was a particularly warm day for Boston, at around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the freezing temperatures of the past week. Men wore their hats a little less snugly, children huddled about the fire a little less closely, and a metal tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses decided to collapse. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sam, I've never even held a molasses before. I didn't know there was 2.3 million gallons of it in the world. What was that much molasses doing in one place? Well, young grasshopper, as with most things, the answer is alcohol. As the cylinder came tumbling down, it unleashed a delicious brown tsunami that was 25 feet high at its peak. Also, forget everything you know about idioms, because the waves were recorded to have moved as fast as 35 miles per hour. That means you're slower than molasses. Nerd. Add that to the fact that molasses is way more dense than water, and you've got a recipe for some major destruction. Eyewitness accounts of the event describe houses being swept off their foundation and subsequently demolished. The level of damage was comparable to a tornado sweeping through, its path of devastation stretching a half-mile long. Here's a picture of, something. I can't tell what it was supposed to be. All I know is that molasses clearly does not play. That's not all, though. A truck was picked up and chucked into the harbor, a train car got knocked off its tracks, and a bunch of dogs and horses just straight up drowned. Oh, and some people, too. Around 150 were injured and 21 were killed in the disaster. Talk about the sweet release of death, am I right? Ha ha! A couple of reasons these numbers were so high were that A, once you're stuck in something that thick and sticky, you're kind of fucked unless 3 guys with a rope happen to show up, and B, the affected area was so large that 3 guys with a rope would have no way to get to you without getting trapped themselves. As a result, rescuers had to wait several days before the molasses either sufficiently drained out of an area or hardened up enough in the sun and the cold so that it could be walked on without sinking in. After the incident, cleanup was carried out primarily by blasting the streets with salt water, which took many weeks and stained the waters of the Boston Harbor brown for months. Naturally, all the rescue workers and cleanup crew ended up getting molasses all over them, which led to them getting the stuff all over payphones, subway cars, door handles, you name it. It's said that for decades afterwards, residents could still catch a whiff of molasses outside during the summer months, and Boston remains one of Forbes' top 10 stickiest places to this day. Our next tale took place on the evening of June 18th, 1875 in Dublin. A fire had been raging across several blocks of the city for many hours prior, and like many of us do after a long hard day of wreaking havoc, the fire decided to mosey on over to the malt house for a much needed drink. Around 5,000 barrels of whiskey and other social lubricants subsequently burst from the heat, sending a cascade of what is essentially liquid fuel careening out into the street, carrying the inferno on its back wherever it went. Now normally you think people would just run away from the impending danger, but being that this is Ireland, the crowds of people had a better idea. They said, hey fellow upstanding citizens, why don't we band together and help with the cleanup efforts? So they decided to dispose of the river of beverage running through their neighborhood by hiding it safely away in their stomachs. Some people drank directly from the street, while the classier among them were seen taking off their nasty sweat-filled boots, filling them up and just gulping away. Keep in mind, while today's version is flavored primarily with cinnamon, this Fireball whiskey contained a special blend of spices including ash, street filth, tiny shards of glass and wood, and whatever else you could imagine. But hey, free drinks are free drinks. In the end, 13 people perished as a result of this incident. Was it from the fire? Nope. Smoke inhalation? Drowning? Still no. Unfortunately, though they did boot, and they did rally, they forgot to do both at once. As a result, all 13 deaths were actually from alcohol poisoning caused by chugging too much runaway liquor. So let this be a lesson, kids. Don't drink street booze. You have no idea where it's been. Just go to a dispensary instead. Moving along, here's another potation inundation, this time on the other aisle. 1814 London was a rapidly growing metropolis, and like all metropolises, it had its fair share of densely populated slums, one of which was St. Giles Rookery. And what better place is there to build a brewery than amongst the impoverished and thirsty? Unfortunately, said brewery apparently got cocky and decided to skimp out on their iron rings that hold up the big beer things budget, leading to one of the vats completely collapsing and knocking over all the others with it. In total, around 323,000 imperial gallons, or 1.5 million liters of beer were unleashed that day. The flood of ale pushed over the wall of the brewery with the same ease that Jared Kushner pushes old ladies down escalators, gushing out into the streets and totally demolishing multiple homes situated nearby. Good morning, America. I'm reporter Pat Lauer. No relation, don't worry. We're here at the scene of the world's biggest party foul. Ma'am, how does this whole thing make you feel? Ha, don't worry. This isn't the first time alcohol has torn my household apart. In all seriousness, my husband has struck me on multiple occasions. At least 8 people are known to have died as a result of the incident, either from drowning or from having their house dropped on them. In spite of this, nobody was held responsible for the disaster, with courts concluding that the collapse was an act of God. I wish people were that lenient with act of God clauses today, like, alright, here's your coffee, ma'am. Whoops. Jesus Christ, it burns! Yes. That was Jesus Christ who did that. You motherfucker, my legs are fusing together! Hey, God works in mysterious ways. Maybe you were supposed to be a mermaid, who knows? So, I hope the knowledge of these events will serve to empower you in your life going forward. If you find one of your friends trapped in molasses, now you'll say, don't worry, I'll save you. In a couple days. If your street is ever flooded with hard liquor, you'll say, oh boy, time to start chugging. In moderation, of course. Hey kids, time to alienate 23.9% of the United States from my potential audience, cause today, we're talking popes. Now don't get me wrong, the modern papacy is a great thing. Just a genuinely virtuous man being elected to govern and set an example for Christians everywhere, that's awesome. But back in the day, not so. See, in the Middle Ages, the church was one of the greatest powers in the Western world, having massive influence over monarchs and laymen alike. And as we know, with great power, comes great tomfoolery. Here's some of the less wholesome popes that history has to offer. Pope Stephen VI assumed the pontificate in May of 896, during a time of great instability for the papacy, where rulers and families of all different shapes and sizes were vying for influence over the Catholic Church. As such, successive popes from this period often had different ideas about how things should be run. Stephen, for example, didn't much care for Pope Formosus, the guy before last. Why? It's complicated. Even if I could wrap my head around all this, it'd probably be boring as hell, so just take it on good faith that Steve had a lot of beef with Formosus. So much beef, or as we call it papal bull, that Stephen couldn't even be happy that the dude was already dead. So he had the 8-month-old corpse of Formosus dug up, dressed up in pope clothes, sat down on a throne, and literally put on trial, with a deacon appointed to give all his responses for him. So you thought you could get away from the law with that little dying stunt of yours? Well, tell me, Mr. Thrombosis, did you violate canon law, commit perjury, and pretend to be a bishop when you weren't? Yes, pasta fazool, I am a fool. I've heard all I need to hear. This court finds you guilty, and everything you did as pope, we legally declare to be fake and dumb and stupid and dumb. Now throw him in the river. What? The river? Can he do that? See the hat? That means I'm Pope. P-O-O-P Pope. You better 3-point that bitch into the briny deep right quick, or I'm gonna raise hell. Metaphorically. So they threw him in the river. This whole thing caused an uproar among Formosus supporters, and after Formosus's corpse was allegedly seen performing miracles at the riverbank, Stephen ended up being overthrown, imprisoned, and executed by strangulation. The body, now slimy and disgusting, was fished out of the Tiber and reinterred in St. Peter's Basilica, where it rests to this day. Next, we'll talk about John the 12th. This guy already looks like one of my characters. Why don't we just, yeah, there we go. This guy ascended to the throne when he was just 18 years old, which is insane. If I was elected world's biggest hat wearer at that age, you better believe things would get real unpapal real quick. I'm talking gambling, hookers, setting fires, and toasting to the devil. And when you know it, these are all things John the 12th did. It's said that he took the sacred palace and literally made it into a whorehouse. Matter of fact, while researching the guy, I stumbled across this list of sexually active popes. This is a real Wikipedia article. Take a hike, toilet paper orientation, daddy's got a new favorite. John is featured prominently on this list, of course. He had a thing for widows for some reason. Personally, I'm not big on weepy old hags. I'm more of a carefree young hag type of guy, but to each their own. He also banged his niece a bunch, which not the most virtuous tumultuous act, but, you know, Middle Ages and bloodline, fucking whatever. His playboy lifestyle eventually caught up to him, though, leading to the Synod of Rome, where everyone got together to talk about what a piece of shit he is so they could kick him off the throne. Besides all the deviancy, there was a lot of things they had problems with. For one, someone once offered John some money to ordain a 10-year-old as a bishop, and he was just like, alright, I would have done it for free, honestly. Look how big those robes are on him, that's hilarious. He also had a deacon ordained in a horse stable, just like, oh, for fuck's sake, alright, let's get this over with. Shouldn't we be doing this in, like, a church? Listen, bucko, if it's good enough for Jesus to be born in, it's good enough for you to have your little cardinal party. No, sir, not cardinal, he's just a deacon. Not if you keep running your mouth, you aren't. He also liked going on hunting trips now and then, generally considered to be something popes don't do, although my suspicion is that they were just tired of cleaning his big stupid camo hat every time. Probably his worst act, though, was putting on a helmet, followed closely in second by the time one of his subdeacons got on his nerves, so he literally cut off his dick and murdered him. So between all this and some conflicts with Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire, John was uncanonically ousted in 963. Except as soon as Otto left Rome, nobody was there to pressure him off physically anymore, so John was like, lol, just kidding, rounded up all his groupies, kicked the new pope off the throne, and continued his role like nothing happened by early 964. But just a few months later, fate caught up with John, and he died the way he lived. Committing adultery. Now let's be real, we all have our little guilty pleasures in life. Some people like a nice bag of Cheetos, others like scented candles, or poorly drawn educational videos. Alexander VI liked watching horses fuck. According to Vatican chronicler Johann Burckhardt, he would specifically arrange for his stallions to be introduced to mares in heat outside his palace, and he'd stand up on his balcony to watch them violently mate, which just tickled him pink for some fucking reason, and he'd laugh uproariously during the entire spectacle. He also once threw a party in the palace called the Banquet of Chestnuts, also referred to as the Joust of Whores. Wait a minute, horse jousting, horses banging. Was dyslexia a thing back then? Nah, but during the banquet, Alexander had 50 of Rome's finest raggedy harlots line up and strip down for him and his guests, which, by the way, included 2 of his children, which, by the way, he had many children, but at this point hardly a concern. Guests began throwing chestnuts at the ladies, who got down on their hands and knees and scrambled frantically, like the cook at Denny's when I held him at gunpoint, trying to collect as many as they could. After this went on for a while, Alexander was like, alright kiddos, game time. Whoever can bang the most broads before the night's over wins Rome's finest silks, and the only condition is that anybody who makes a joke about nutting on someone's chest gets disqualified. It's too easy. This is all according to that one Johann guy, mind you. Some secondary sources differ pretty significantly on the more lurid details of all this, so do take it with a grain of salt, but at the same time, this guy was the official record taker for the ceremonies he was involved with, so it seems equally likely to me that the other guys just wanted to save a bit of face, but who knows. In the end, primary sources are usually the most reputable source of information. After all, what better way to learn about stuff than from people who have direct experience in the subject? Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, I just woke up from a nap I took in January of 2020 and boy are my arms tired. Let's see what I missed. Queen's dead, war in Ukraine, the Taliban's back. What is... Holy shit! They made a movie called Scoob! Unprecedented global pandemic, Space Jam 2, some popular guy named Brandon. Yep, that just about covers it. Anyway, we all know about the scientific names of animals, but did you ever wonder what they actually mean? To find out, we must look to taxonomists. They're the guys responsible for the systems of nomenclature we use to classify organisms, and boy are they convoluted. First you got the big 8, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I've seen plenty of mnemonic devices for this, but since the D just showed up in the 90s and is still disputed by some scientists, he's usually not included. So allow me to suggest a few. Dizzy kids puke cereal on fairground staff. Dumb kittens pushing cups over feeds growing spite. Donkey Kong's fucking serendipitously.
The way this whole thing works differs slightly depending on which kingdom you pick, so today we'll be sticking to the animal one cause that one's the coolest and I'm in it. So what constitutes each taxon is pretty arbitrary. They basically just serve to act as another set of branches in the tree that taxonomists build. The one exception is species, which is generally defined as any group of animals that can have babies with each other that aren't sterile freaks. Mule, liger, zedonk, skunk ape, they can live fulfilling lives, but they're all shooting blanks, so they don't count. On the other hand, in our innumerable trespasses against God, we can make things like chidandanes, which actually work, so dogs are dogs are dogs. Besides species though, it's the Wild West in here. Plenty of times, 8 tiers isn't even enough for scientists, so they just stick new sub-levels in between. Legions, cohorts, tribes, series, divisions, and if you want to keep going, you can throw all kinds of prefixes on any of these for even more layers. There's even subspecies, which the more pedantic of you may think to yourselves that creating names for subspecies at all kind of undermines the single somewhat agreed upon definition in the whole tree. To that, my friends taxonomists say, But while that's pretty complex, the actual names themselves are pretty easy to wrap your head around. Though taxonomists may hide behind their fancy Greek and Latin, the Vulgate is no substitute for wit. Now, I've scraped through the scientific names of a load of species, and most of them can be split into a few categories. The simplest ones are the animals that already have names in Greek or Latin. It's a lion, I'm calling it Leo. Done. Tiger, it's a tigris. Cat, it's a caddis. Easy. Multi-word names can be translated the same way. For the golden eagle, we got Aquila chrysaetos. Gold eagle eagle. They decided to be a show off and do eagle in Greek and Latin. Essentially the same though. But if a species is too specific or exotic for a one-to-one translation, that's when you gotta get a little creative. A lot of the time, inspiration comes from just giving the creature the old once-over and pointing out some cool-looking body part. Generally, the more distinct of an identifying feature it is, the more likely it'll get in the name. For example, Homeboy took one look at this thing and said, "Yup, red triangle slug. I'm going on break." We call this thing a fucking unicorn, almost like that means one horn or something. Also, some guy deadass looked at an octopus and said, well, all they got is heads and feet. I'ma call them headfoot. And now biologists everywhere say cephalopod unironically. Matter of fact, if it's got feet, chances are that's part of its name somewhere. You got 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 2 feet, equal feet, both feet, double feet, stomach feet, lip feet, sucker feet, wing feet, big feet, slow feet, or feet, both feet, joint feet, no feet, 10,000 feet, cow's feet, spade feet, cat feet, small feet. If it doesn't look that interesting, another thing to point out is where you found it. This could be a territory like American bear or Siamese crocodile, or just a habitat like woods macaque or toilet rat. But that's boring. We need to look at the men behind the magic and what drives and motivates them. Now, if there's one thing that the scientific community loves, it's clout. And there's no better way to go down in history than plastering your own name on some shit you found. But not all fields have the same volume of things to scribble the old John Hancock over. On the one end, you got physicists just making up their own slightly different form of ionizing radiation measurement, and even then only the top dogs got away with it. Now zoology, any little goober flouncing through the underbrush can say, this one has 13 spots, but the one in the book's only got 11. I will call him Splinkus's ladybird. Alternatively, plenty of biologists have given shoutouts to their contemporaries, both other biologists and those across the academic gamut, from geologists to physicists to explorers and more. Naturally, Darwin's got a shitload, but even the background characters get immortalized one way or another. Who are Thomson, Grant, Summering, Erlanger, Speke, and Cuvier? I don't know, but they've all got gazelles, so they must be pretty cool. Of course, other times, the name checks go to people who had fuck all to do with anything except for one taxonomist being a fan of theirs. Plenty of popular celebrities have species named after them, but since all the big cute stuff was found and branded a while ago, most of these idols are commemorated through repulsive little invertebrates. You got Scaptia, Beyonce. The only similarity I can gather here is queen bee, looks like a bee, both not a real bee. There's Anomphilus gregarius, an old stone named after an old stone. In 2007, one Jason Bond, a professor of biology at UC Davis, dubbed this little dude Myrmecia Neil Youngie to honor his favorite musician, which caused my man Stephen Colbert to go on TV and profess his utter indignation at not having a spider named after himself. So naturally, the next year, Bond actually went on the Colbert Report to announce the naming of apostachus Stephen Colbert. So, if that gives any of you epic biologists out there any ideas, you know, I wouldn't be opposed. Please, I would do anything. For the love of God, I'll even take a lichen. The world of politics is by no means immune to this phenomenon. Obama alone has fucking 9, as do a load of other presidents. Trump's got a moth with funny hair, Bush has a fungus beetle, Reagan's a wasp, Carter's got a darter, and so forth. Even Austria's most famous painter got the honor through this blind cave beetle. Mind you, it was 1933, so you can only blame the guy a tiny bit. Hitler actually wrote him a letter saying, "Oh, thank you, my little entomolomensch," and then went on to do, you know, Hitler things. Fun fact, not only was this beetle stuck with just about the worst name you could have, it's also now facing extinction solely because of its value to Nazi memorabilia collectors. Guess old habits die hard. Fictional characters have their fair share of species under their belt. On the topic of evil beetles, this one's named after Darth Vader because he kinda looks like his helmet, I guess. This was actually named by the same guy who did the Bush one and belongs to the same genus. There's also this mite, genus Darth Vaderum, which is a lot more accurate and frightening. In 2012, a single bone from above the eye socket of a hitherto unidentified theropod dinosaur was being studied. And suddenly, under the light of the full moon, the guy working with the specimen had his neck covered with hair and his lips clench into a pog and his endocrine system fill with soy, and he said, "It's just like the eye of Sauron." And then he started chewing on Funko Pops and sweating cream of meme and snorting G Fuel and shitting D20s everywhere until the prostate stimulation made him. The dino's genus is now Sauroniops, from Eye of Sauron. This spider was named after Godric Gryffindor because it looks like the Sorting Hat. SpongeBob has not a sponge, but a fungus. The legendary birds from Pokemon each have their own, you guessed it, beetle, and the list goes on. Scientists are nerds. Who knew? Anyway, while this all seems kind of chaotic, there is some method to the madness. One rule is the principle of priority. This states that once somebody publishes their chosen name for a species for the first time, that's the name, and other taxonomists typically can't change it. This has led to plenty of misnomers coined by whoever got their foot in the door first, particularly in the case of the guys doing this stuff before we had the luxury of genetic analysis. Here's one. Red panda? Nah. Shining cat, coined in 1825. To be fair, they're actually about as close to cats as they are to actual pandas, so whatever. Here's two. Capsicum chinense. Eaten there? Sure. Native? Only off by around half a globe, where literally all hot peppers came from. This principle holds true even if someone thinks they found a new species, only to later discover that it was already named. For example, in 1824, one John Edward Gray documented the plain zebra, calling it Equus burchellii, or Burchell's horse, named after a renowned naturalist of the day. Little did he know, back in 1785, some other douche classified this character as the quagga. The last quagga died in a Dutch prison in 1883. So, why do we care? Well, in the 2000s, scientists decided to scrape some gunk off a dry quagga pelt and study its DNA. And from that they realized, wait a minute, apparently this guy and zebras could have, made a little plaid in the hay together. So technically they're one species. And today they're both called quagga. Sounds kinda asinine, but then again so does asinus, and that worked out fine. Just to maintain the distinction, the extinct subspecies was renamed quagga quagga, so you know it's the real quagga. This double naming convention has been done with a lot of subspecies, in fact. Wild horse, spotted panther, or my favorite, gorilla. Just like, yeah, it's the gorillest gorilla that ever gorilled. Fuck you want from me. A closely related rule also states that the names of all taxa have to be unique. So if two people coincidentally name any taxon the same thing, the older one gets to stay and the new one gets the boot. Like if you saw a genus called echidna, you'd think it was, an echidna, right? Well no, that'd make too much sense. For a while it was true, from 1797 to 1811. Then it was pointed out that someone else already called a genus of moray eels echidna back in 1788. So the real echidna had to be changed to Tachyglossus, or quick tongue. Then a decade later, a dude did the same thing for a genus of vipers. Another 22 years passed, people discovered the same thing, and they were renamed to Bitis, cause they bit us. That one at least made a bit of sense, given that the original echidna from Greek mythology was half lady, half snake, but who cares at this point. Anyway, I've just barely scraped the surface of all the goofy names out there, so feel free to post more down below. That's all I've got for now. Till next time, I'm Sam Nella, and I'll see ya in 2025. Don't say it, don't think it, don't say it, don't think it.